It's July the 29th at 9 o'clock, and I'm sitting here calmly talking to you while the house is on fire. I could smell smoke, and I thought it was in my kitchen. I went in there to see, and I went out in the hall to leave my neighbor the paper I give to her every day, and I could still smell smoke. And in a minute she came in. She's a nurse coming in off her night duty, and she says that the fire's down on the 5th floor. There are 5 wagons out there, and they told us all just to stay put, that we're not in any danger, that the fire's under control. But we must be sure and keep our windows down to keep the smoke out. Well, there's some smoke in here, but I know that getting in an elevator in a fire is a dangerous thing, and I know I don't want to run down 9 flights of stairs in my nightgown and have nowhere to go when I get there. So I'll just trust the fireman and talk to you. I want to back up a little bit on my story about the night that Marianne and I were picked up by the oil agent and his uncle and brought into Electra. I got confused on the cars. The way I told it, there'd have been 3 cars there, but there were just 2. The men were riding together, and one of them went in the car with me and the other in the back car. They were able to tow my car because they had something they'd used in the oil field, either a chain or a strong rope, and they were able to handle the situation. Now, going back to DeBeck, that's a very small town in western Colorado. I'm surprised that it's on the map because there's nothing there. And I thought about how beautiful Colorado was and how many nice places I could have had to spend the 2 days that we waited for our car to get repaired. And I got ashamed of myself every time I think about it, that I ought to be thankful that we didn't get hurt and be willing to stay there in such a sorry place. They had only one grocery store in the town, and they had nothing to sell. The hotel was impossible. We did sleep there. I ate breakfast one morning, but I saw in the kitchen, so I couldn't eat there. We would go out and get what we could at the grocery store, and this is all we got, was pressed meat, what they call maybe summer sausage, something like that, and bread. And we had no place to eat it except to sit on a culvert in the weeds and eat the bread. And that was what we had to eat for 2 days. Now, there was a bright spot in it for me. At night, there were some men there I could play bridge with. They were mining engineers, and of course they went out to work in the day, and when they came back after their evening meal, they were glad to play bridge. Some of them were pretty good players. They had a Victrola there and some records that I didn't care anything about, but Marion and Sue could keep themselves pretty well entertained listening to them. Through the day, we spent a good deal of time talking about the good time that we had already had on that trip. And the thing that impressed us most, I guess, was Old Faithful. But the thing that I remember with the most joy was a red spot I saw on the mountain one day when we were out at the Camp Roosevelt, which I told you was in a far part of the park where not so many people went. We wanted to go to the petrified forest. Now, nobody wanted to go but us, just the 3. And the forest ranger said that he didn't want to make a trip for just 3 people, but if we would promise not to take any of the specimens from the petrified forest, he would tell us how to get there. So we started. We hadn't gone very far till I saw I could not make that trip. It was just too much. I couldn't climb a mountain. And Sue wasn't doing very much better than I was about it. So we decided to let Marion go on by himself. He was gone about 3 or 4 times, as long as I thought he'd be. I thought about the bears. I thought he might have got lost. And I thought that he might have got hurt, and nobody knew where he was, and it was an agonizing experience for me and for Sue, too. So we sat where we were when he left us, just sat there and waited for him. And I looked up one time and saw that red spot coming down the hill, that the side of the mountain, I mean. That red spot was that sweater that I borrowed for him in Cheyenne. I think that was about the prettiest thing I ever saw in my life. In Quebec, the garage was very inefficient, and they had ordered a part for our car, or something to go on the wheel. Ordered it from Grand Rapids, and at the end of 2 days it hadn't come, and I guess they got disgusted with us worrying them to get the car ready. Anyway, they put a makeshift part on. They had made I saw the thing, it was a ring of copper, and told us that we could go on our way. This had taken more money than I thought it would. You see, we'd had that stopped in Thistle and a repair bill there, and then we had stayed in Quebec long enough for us to have been home. I saw we were running short of money, so when we got to Grand Junction, I wired home and so told Papa I needed some money, that I'd like to have it when I got to Pueblo that night. Now, I enjoyed one of the advantages of living in a small town where people knew you, because in Quanah, everybody knew us. Papa had been there for years and years and years. The message went in that I needed money, and Papa was not in town. And I don't know whether, I guess Mom wasn't there either, because the Western Union sent the message to Frank. They knew then, knowing that I was in trouble, they were going to get somebody to get me out. So that night when we got to Pueblo, so tired we couldn't hold our heads up, and hungry, and everything bothering us, the Western Union man didn't want to let me have the money. He didn't like my identification. He said, can't you get a letter that's been addressed to you and show that to me? I said I could, but I would have to unpack that trunk. Now, you don't want to make me do that, do you? And he looked at me for a minute, and he said, no, I don't. So he let us have the money. We got something to eat, got a place to stay for the night, and got on our way. When we got out not very far from Pueblo, the wheel came off. That makeshift part they'd made in Quebec was a dangerous thing, because we had just come down an incline, and Marion said if the wheel had come off while we were up at the top of that little hill, well, no telling what would have happened to us. We sat there by the road for a long time. And finally, 2 young fellows came along in a truck, and they had a tow rope. They took us into Pueblo. We stayed there till they got the car fixed, and they did a good job on it. So we got off again on our way. That night, we were in Mount Kaplan, New Mexico. Now, Mount Kaplan is an extinct volcano, and it's an interesting place to go. You can drive up and look down on the crater, but on account of our delay and our need to get home, because we knew they were worrying about us there, and our lack of money, we didn't make any effort to see that crater, but we did see it in a later trip. We went into the little hotel. Mount Kaplan's a very small place, and the hotel was as small as hotel could be. I think they must have had about 6 rooms for guests. When we got into the lobby, there was a girl sitting there with the most dejected expression on her face I have ever seen. I well thought, well, what is the matter with you? I learned later that she was the new teacher who had just come to town, and I felt sorry for the poor thing because the pouring down rain and the desolation of the place, she must have thought she'd come to the end of the world. We had to have more money trouble before we got out of that place. We left about 4 o'clock in the morning because we wanted to get home that night, and it was going to be a hard day's drive. The cars in that day didn't go as fast as they do now, and besides that, the roads weren't so good. And then we had another problem that people don't have now. We didn't have any trunk. We carried our luggage on the running board. We had a luggage carrier for it out there, and whenever it rained, well, we had to get out and put all the bags in the car with us. We got down the road a little piece, too far to turn around and go back, and we discovered that Marion, in his hurry to get off that morning, had left all of our money on the dresser at this little hotel. We got into Amarillo, and we were in a fix without any money, and we had a flat tire. We sat there till somebody came along, took Marion and the tire. We didn't have an extra tire. Took the tire into town to get it fixed, and Marion found his friend from Rice. This friend's father had a drugstore, and he okayed a check, or I guess it was Sunday. He evidently cashed the check for Marion, and Marion brought us back some money enough to get home on. Sue said she certainly was glad that happened the way it did, because Marion had been bragging and talking about Rice all the time we were gone, and she said she was glad that it really had done us some good. We got to Goodnight that night. Goodnight's about 3/4 of a day drive from Quanah, and Goodnight was not any bigger than Mount Kaplan. They didn't even have a hotel. Somebody told us of a home that would rent us some rooms, so we went there, and we found that the lady was the aunt of a friend of ours. We took an early morning start, and we got home in the daytime. Old Papa was mad. He came out to the garage as we drove in, and he didn't even act glad to see us, and I don't blame him, because we were so delayed, and it was wrong of us not to have sent him a message so he wouldn't worry about us. And he said, you never are going to get to go anywhere again. Well, we went lots of places after that. Sometimes Mom and Papa went with us. Sometimes I went with people they didn't even know. Marion graduated from Rice at the beginning of the Depression. He was the first in the first class that were not offered jobs. When he got his degree as an electrical engineer, he thought it would be the way it had always been. General Electric, Western Electric, telephone company, and other companies had representatives there when the boys got their degrees, because they didn't have any girls in school. And they were offered jobs right on the minute up until Marion's class graduated. He had quite a bit of experience before he got started out. But Mama and Marion and my nephew David went to Washington soon after he got home, before he tried to find anything to do in Quanah. Washington's Mama's favorite city, and we had been there the few days that we went with the El Paso Shriners, and she had always wanted to go back, and David was her first grandchild, and she had always said that as soon as he was old enough, she was going to take him to Washington. So they had a very nice trip up there. And when Marion got home, he worked for Frank in his grocery store. He worked as a delivery boy, delivery man. Now, I know that's an honorable job, and there's nothing wrong with it, but you don't go to the university 5 years and get a degree in electrical engineering to drive a grocery wagon. I will never forget this. One morning, Marion was sitting in the kitchen eating his breakfast. He was dressed in white. He had white linen trousers and a pretty white shirt. A tramp came along. Mama gave him his breakfast. He sat on the step outside the kitchen, and I could see both of them, and I thought, now, how fortunate Marion is. He does not have any more money than that tramp, but he's sitting here in the best situation, and this tramp doesn't have a nickel or anybody to help him, and he just has to depend on whoever will give him something. In 1933, Marion and Reba Boyles, a friend of Mama's, a young teacher, and I went to Chicago to the fair. Now, that fair was wonderful. It had many things to show the progress of, technicalities, inventions, and so on. But it didn't have the splendor that the San Francisco fair that I attended in 1915, which was to celebrate the opening of the Panama Canal. One time, Marion gave me a terrible fright. It's there. We went to the fair mostly at night. We would go late in the afternoon and stay till after 10 o'clock, and then we'd sleep till noon the next day. One night he went to a hotel to hear Guy Lombardo and his orchestra, and he didn't come home. About 3 o'clock he hadn't come home, and of course I was frantic. Finally he came in just grinning from ear to ear. I just knew he'd been held up and maybe killed. And I was glad to see that happy expression on his face. And I said, "What in the world, Marion?" He said, "Well, I did what I've been afraid a long time I'd do." He said, "I stayed till the streetcars stopped running and I had to walk home." One of Marion's jobs, she had several temporary jobs through the Depression, was down near Houston in an oil field. David, our brother, was employed by a New York oil man. He was in charge of the man's business in Texas. But through the Depression, that wasn't such a good job. He was living in San Antonio at that time, and he lent a man a rig to dig an oil well. And one of the conditions was that he would give Marion a job. So Marion gave work down in the oil field, and it was very hard work. Excuse me, very unpleasant. And the worst of all was the man didn't pay him. And he worked in San Antonio and in Houston. And when he worked in those two places, and school had started, and I was back in Fort Worth both those years, I would go down to see him. I could go on, once I went on the bus, and sometimes I drove down there. One time when he was in Houston, the bus had an accident, and I got about half the way there, and that's as far as it got for hours. He stayed at the bus station and waited for me until he gave hopes of the bus getting in that night, and he went home. So I got in to almost morning, and I couldn't telephone him. I knew where he lived and his street address, but I did not know the name of the landlady, and I couldn't look up the number, so I sent him a telegram. Went to bed. The next morning he came, got me, and took me out to his boarding house. Then we had a job with the government on the hydrographer. The hydrographer was a boat that was making a map of the coast. It was right interesting. He was stationed in Port Arthur, but he couldn't like the work too long because it came time for him to go out in a launch. Everybody on that boat had to take the turn on the launch, and he got deathly seasick, so that wasn't too good for him. I went to see him twice when he was down there. One of the teachers in our school had a friend, ex-roommate at the University of Texas, who lived there, and she went down with me one time, and that was a very interesting trip. Some fellows came over Sunday to see us, and we went crabbing. It was the only time I've ever been crabbing in my life, and it was fun. Just to take a string or a bolt or any little heavy thing we could get, tie it to the string and drop it in the water, and the crabs would bite. Jerk the string, you could bring it up, and they were easy to catch. We took them home. These people we were visiting were well-to-do. They had well, I don't know whether they called it a wash house or what it was, but they had some kind of little house in the backyard, and they had gas heaters out there and wash tubs. We dropped the crabs in the boiling water. Now that sounds like a cruel thing to do, but they died the minute they hit the water, and boiled them, and they were very, very good. Then from there, Marion went to Denver. He took a civil service examination and got this position. I believe it was in the Department of Interior. Now, Marion didn't do well in Rice because he had too much fun. He just barely passed. But he was serious about his studies now, and during that time he had no jobs. He studied a good deal. He enrolled in the University of Colorado for night school. He got a degree, and his record was so good that they offered him a job, so he moved to Denver. Papa and Mama and I went up to see Marion several times while he lived in Denver. We went twice to Allen's Park. One time we stayed in Denver the whole time we were up there. And my nephew David went with us. He was a big boy then, big enough to drive. And one time we took David and Billy both. And Denver's had such an interesting museum that I like to go there, and Mom and I'd go, and we'd stay a long time and look, and I got so provoked with David, he just ran through it and apparently didn't glance. It just took a glance. I talked to him about it, and he said, all right, now tell me what, let me tell you what I saw. And the child told me more about the museum than I could tell him when I'd taken so much time to look. Allen's Park was a pretty place. It was out in the mountains. Marion had some friends that he thought a great deal of that lived out there. The man's name was Barney. I've forgotten his wife's name. They had one child. And they were having a hard time because of the depression. Barney didn't have much to do. And one time he shot a deer, and he was caught with it. It was off season, and the ranger was just about to give him what he would expect to get for shooting a deer out of season. And Barney talked to him. He said, now, if you didn't have anything to eat, if you needed meat, you'd know how I'd feel about it. And the ranger let him go. We invited him over to eat dinner with us one night, And his wife told us about an experience she had that wasn't very pleasant. She kept the baby's milk out in the spring, and when she went to get the milk one day, there was a bear down there, and she ran back to the house to get a gun, but when she came out, the bear was gone. At Allen's Park one night, I went out into the clothesline to get something, and I saw a red blaze that seemed to cover the whole sky, and what on earth, it frightened me so. I thought the woods must be on fire. Maybe we were going to burn. But there was nothing I could do about it. Next day I got the paper, and I found out that what I had seen was the aurora borealis. Now, when I got back to Fort Worth, no, that isn't right. We got the Fort Worth Star Telegram through the mail. When it came, I learned that people in Fort Worth had seen the Great Northern Lights too. It was here that I learned to drive in the mountains. One time, when Billy and David went up there with us, Marion took David into Denver to stay with him a weekend, and I was left there with just Mama and Papa and Billy. Billy was about 8 years old, and he wasn't any help to him. Sometimes he was worse than that because he'd take spells he wanted to go home. And one time I had a horrible time keeping him. He was going to go and call his folks and go home that night. And I persuaded him to stay till morning, and after that, well, it was all right. Anyway, I just sat there with nowhere to go. There were lots of pretty wildflowers around there, and we always had them on the table, and the climate was good, but it wasn't a place you just want to sit down. And I thought, well, the road's just as wide up on those mountains as it is down here, and I'll just get over my fear. We'll just go somewhere. So I filled my car, and we went. And I found out that what I had said was right, that the road was just as wide up there, and it wasn't anything to be afraid of, and I drove in the mountains from then on. I went to Colorado several times after that. I worked up on my degree at the university, and I stayed in Boulder. When I did that, I had some friends up there from Fort Worth. The Reeds, Miss Reed was my principal. They had a cottage out at Ward, out in the mountains, and they'd come get me for the weekend. One time, I went up with some friends here, the Rainies. I didn't have a car. I didn't take my car up. And I didn't take my car up at the time the Reeds took me out either. The Rainies took me up to Cheyenne, and every weekend we'd go somewhere. And the next time I went up, I did take my car. Two teachers from Quanah went with me. And then I didn't go up to Colorado anymore until Marion married, and I went up there to see him and Jane. Now, the third generation of our family came like this. We had the two boys in the 20s, and in the 30s, we got two little girls. Frank and Lorraine's little Sandra was born in 1931, and Nancy was born in 1935. That was one nice thing about all the little children in our family. Each one of them got to be the baby for a while and to be petted for a few years before another baby came along. Then in the 40s, we got two more little girls, Marion and Jane's little girls. And those children were such as a lot. All of them were just so cute and pretty and sweet and smart. Just enjoyed them so much when they were little. And now they really and truly are a godsend to me. I don't have any of my generation left. And if I didn't have those girls and Bill's wife, Sally, why, life wouldn't be the same for me. In 1936 was Texas Centennial. You know, Texas won their independence from Mexico in 1936, and it wasn't until 1945 that we came into the Union. This centennial was celebrated in Dallas. It was, well, some people thought it was better than Chicago Fair. Anyway, it was quite a fair. And Fort Worth had the Casa Mañana. That was a playhouse, opera house with a dome. First one, it might not have been the first one in the world, but it's the first one I ever heard of. Anyway, the man that built it, this theater in the round, went over to Russia and built a copy of it. Now, the Dallas Fair was, of course, much bigger. Mama and I went down, and it was hot. But the grounds were pretty, and the exhibitions were good, except one thing. In the boy is playing. There was one unhappy experience at the Dallas Centennial in 1936. There was a show there called Ripley's Believe It or Not. Now, Ripley had an article in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram every day called Believe It or Not, and it was an interesting thing. Oh, it had things something like this. Maybe a woman had lost a ring and was cleaning the fish and found the ring in the fish, or maybe there'd be a picture of a tree limb that had a knot on it that looked like a man's face, and things of that sort. But this show was terrible. It was monstrosities and freaks, humans. When Mama saw a little girl that had no arms and legs, she fainted. And I didn't know what I was going to do about it. But the attendants in there knew. They were used to that, evidently. So they got her a chair, and she sat there a while. Then we got into another show not too far away, and it was ice skating. She had a good seat there and a cool drink, and she got all right. She didn't want to go to Casa Mañana. That was Fort Worth's celebration of the centennial. It was a show, a musical show in the theater on the round. It was an extravaganza, and I wanted to see it, so I took her home. Then I came back a few days later and saw it. It was beautiful, I thought. The songs and dances were pretty, and the main attraction was Sally Rand. She was a nude dancer, the first one we'd ever heard of. Her dance was perfectly beautiful. She could have had on boxer shorts and a khaki shirt, and it would have been the same, because she had two huge white ostrich plume fans, and she manipulated those and kept herself covered so you didn't know whether she had on anything or not. You didn't know that she didn't have on anything. I got my first degree in 1937. I had done work as a freshman at TCU, and then summer school there, and the University of Colorado, and that teachers college up in Bellingham, Washington. And then I'd done some correspondence work to the University of Texas, some after-school work in the North Texas State University over at Denton, except I didn't go to Denton. I think I'm the only teacher in Fort Worth that never went to Denton to school. But they had teachers come over here, extension courses. And I kept on until I got enough to get a degree. Mom and Papa came down to see me get my degree. It was at night out in the yard at TCU, and somebody told me I looked pretty, and I said, well, I certainly felt pretty because I had that off my hands. Papa was incensed because they gave PhDs to some people, honorary degrees. The TCU at that time was not conferring PhDs, but they are now. He thought it was just scandalous that they'd give those degrees to people who didn't work for them. I went to Mexico that summer with Bertha Jackson. She was one of my best friends, and I had an apartment with her. Well, it was her apartment, and she let me live with her. We went to Monterey in her car. She had a coupe, and just the two of us went. Now, Monterey is an interesting city. It's worth anybody's time. We saw it, and then we got on the train and went to Mexico City because then the road was not finished and you couldn't drive any further than Monterey. When we got to Mexico City, we had trouble getting a place to stay. We had written to the Riggs Hotel, which was the best hotel in town, and we wanted to do it upright. We hadn't heard anything from them. We thought they'd have a reservation there, but we didn't, and they didn't care. They didn't pay attention to us at all. On the train, there was a nice Mexican man sitting across from us, and he told us that we'd probably have trouble getting a place to stay, and if we did, to go to the Annie Hotel. That it was a nice hotel. So we got in a taxi and went over there, and they couldn't take us, but they were nice to us. They called around and found us a place at the Imperial Hotel. It was a very nice hotel, and we liked to stay there. We didn't get to stay there as long as we wanted to because they had a seminar at the university coming, and these students had reserved all the rooms, and we'd have to get out. I believe it was the end of 8 days. Anyway, we just thought, well, there's nothing to do, we just go home. We didn't have anywhere to stay. Now, I had a friend in Mexico City, Ruth Randall. I'd known her for years, lived with her at the YWCA, and we had kept up our friendship. And Ruth said she just didn't like a bit for us to go home. She'd see what she could do about it. So she got us a place in a private home. This Mexican woman was Mrs. Smith. She was divorced from Mr. Smith, and we saw a little bit of Mexican home life. She had 3 children, and she told us that the oldest girl was going to be 15 the next week, and at 15 the Mexican girls had big coming out parties. She told us that her daughter was having a beautiful dress made, and they were going to have a very elegant reception for her 15th birthday celebration. Well, we found out that Mexicans, same as other people, can tell awfully big lies. They want a word of truth in what she is telling. So when they got close to time, she said they were going to have the reception. She told us the girl was sick, and she had sent her over to her aunt's for her aunt to take care of. Then this woman had one servant. She was a pretty old woman. She'd had her, I think, maybe over a lot. And she told us that she had nice servants' quarters, and she had a bath for the servants. So one day when there wasn't anybody knowing what I was doing, I looked down there where she said the servants' quarters were. There was one room, which was really a big closet, and a cot, and that was all. But we did enjoy Mexico City, though. the cathedral was, of course, you know how pretty it is, and I wish I knew about this. It's Guadalupe is a shrine. St. Anne de Beaupré up in Canada, out from Quebec, is one of the same kind, and there is one in Lima, Peru, and they're the only three in the Americas. But I don't know what it is that makes them distinguished from all other churches. Of course, we went to all the museums, and when I saw Maximilian's coach, it made me feel that I was the very, very wealthy. I never have felt as rich in my life as I did when I stood there and looked at that coach. There I was, just a plain, ordinary working woman, and my car was finer than that emperor's coach. We went to Xochimilco, where they had all the flowers, and Cuernavaca. We ate in a cave, saw the pyramids, and I wish I could go back to them. Since I've been to the pyramids in Egypt, I'd like to make some comparisons, but I won't get back. And like everybody else that goes to Mexico, we went to the bullfight. I couldn't stand the bullfight. The beginning, when they had the parade and all of them came in, it was very spectacular. But when they started killing those bulls, they killed 8 that day, and by the time they'd killed the 3rd one, I had to get up and leave. My knees were quaking, my teeth were chattering, and I just could not stand it. So I said, Bertha, give me the key and I'll go home. We didn't live very far from there, and I could walk home. She said, oh no, just wait, I'll go with you. So we both left. And that was my last bullfight. When I got to Spain, I didn't even think about it for a minute. When Bertha and I came home, the country was very beautiful when we got to Monterey, the drive from Monterey on to Laredo. The sage, I think they called it desert sage, was in bloom. It's a bush that has sort of a gray-green leaf, and it has a beautiful purple flower. And we saw the cactus down there too, are well worth looking at. Of course, we didn't get to see much of the country that trip between Monterey and Mexico City, but I got to go back. David and Menabel came back up to Wichita Falls about this time. They had been living in San Antonio, and we were glad that they could come back to our part of the country, but we did enjoy going down there to see them. See, Marion was there part of the time, and of course he was in Houston 5 years, and we had many trips. Papa and Mom and I would go from Quanah down there, and I went sometimes on the bus. I know one time I went to Houston, and I think I told you about what a hard time I had. But that country around San Antonio is very, very pretty. It's the hill country down there close to where Lyndon Johnson's home was. He is with Lady Bird's down there yet. Frank and Lorraine moved to Fort Worth not too long after this. Frank had sold his grocery store in Quanah and came to Fort Worth. It was too bad for Mom and Papa, but it certainly was nice for me because I got to enjoy the family, and the little girls were so cute and pretty, and I had so much pleasure with them. I enjoyed taking them to things that Fort Worth had a good deal for children. They had concerts and shows for children, and I always would like to take the girls out. And this is going back, but I had never been really sick in my life until 1928. I had cystitis and diarrhea that lasted about 6 weeks, and it was just terrible. That was the year after I came back from the OTO, and that summer I didn't enjoy anything. But I had something in 1939 that lasted, well, I never did get over it. The doctor had a time finding out what it was. Finally, they decided it was, well, first took my tonsils out, and that didn't do any good. It really was arthritis beginning, that, and I was hypothyroid. Now, my cousin Van Zant, who lived here in Fort Worth, died, and Frank and Mary and David met at his funeral. And Mama had told them that Dr. McDaniel in Quanah, who was an excellent surgeon, said that I had to have surgery for my thyroid trouble. The boys decided they didn't want me to have surgery, so they called Mama and told her to send me down to Fort Worth to Dr. Terrell. Margaret, that slow-range sister, drove me down, and Dr. Terrell found out that, Dr. McDaniel had diagnosed the case, and he was right. But Dr. Terrell didn't believe in surgery if it could be avoided, so he had me have x-ray. In 1939, I moved to the Lucerne Apartments, and I stayed there until 1967. As soon as I got able to travel from that thyroid operation, I went to Cuba. Cole Gilbo, my good friend whom I've mentioned before, went, and Nineveh and Billy. Billy was 8 years old. We went to New Orleans in my car. Natalie went with us. Her brother C.A. and his family lived there. And I think her mother and sister were either already there or came later, but we were all together down there. We had a nice little visit with them before we went to Cuba. The New Orleans, as you know, is 100 miles from the Gulf of Mexico, and we had that long boat on the river, which I enjoyed, but where the Mississippi flows into the Gulf of Mexico, just some way didn't impress me as much as the Columbia flowing into the Pacific. That was a fruit boat we were on. It belonged to the United Fruit Company. It had very, very good food, and I wasn't seasick that time. I could enjoy the food. I saw 5 whales, not all at one time. Well, all you could see of the whales was you could see how long they were, and then you could see that spray that they send up. I don't understand exactly, but I think maybe it's something to do with their breathing. Anyway, they send up a spray, and we could see that, but they never got close enough to the boat for us to see them. Havana is a very beautiful city that it was. I don't know what's happened to it since we've been there, and it's too bad that Americans can't enjoy Havana. The cathedral is beautiful. They have the second finest cemetery in the world. The trees and everything about Havana. It's a beautiful city. It's a horseshoe-shaped harbor, and we went across the island. We went to Batavano, and the main thing down there I remember was the sponges. The sponge divers were cutting up the big sponges, and I got some little pieces and took back and put in my schoolroom. And those sponges were just full of the tiniest little shells you can imagine. Well, I put those in my elementary science exhibit at school. Of course, the children were over there all the time fiddling with those things, and they picked out every one of those little shells. I don't know what they did with them. We saw in 2 Cuban homes on the way down to Batavado. One was very crude. The floor was just dirt. The other one was a very nice house. It seemed to be a farmhouse. The floors were tile, and the lady of the house was a lady. She was sitting out on the porch rocking, and she had a servant who was taking care of her child and doing the housework. And the reason we stopped there was on the account of there not being any restrooms on the road. We saw the bidet in that lady's bathroom, and that's the first bidet we ever saw. We didn't know what it was. We had to find out. We saw the workers in the pineapple field. They were cutting pineapples, and they would fill their huge hats with the pineapples until the hat wouldn't hold anymore. Then they'd walk over and dump it in a wagon. My next trip was to the Pacific Coast. I went with 3 other Fort Worth teachers in Viola Tucker's car. That was a nice trip too. We started in the way we always started in, going to west. We went through Colorado and stopped there, and we stopped in Cheyenne again, and then went on up to Yellowstone Park. And from there, we saw things I never had seen before. We went to Rainier National Park and to Lake Louise, stayed all night in Calgary on the way up there. We stayed at a tourist court there, They were not yet calling them motels, and they didn't look like motels. They were not as nice. The place belonged to an Englishman, and I don't know how the subject came up, but I told him I was drinking tea for breakfast, and he said he drank tea too. And I said, well, do you put milk in it? How do you drink it? And he said, I make it so strong that it will hold the spoon up, and then I put the milk in. When we got to Lake Louise, we stayed in a cabin. It was quite nice. It was $9 a day, and for that time, that was a big price to pay. There was a very fine hotel there, and that is marvelous scenery. Viola went up to the telescope on the hotel porch and looked through, and there was a sign on there that said, for hotel guests only. She said, Alice, come here and look at this. And I said, oh, I don't like to. They said, it's for the guests only. I just don't like to do it. She said, you come on up here and look at this. It's worth stealing. I looked, and I think she was right. That night, we went to the hotel to dance with the Indians. Everybody in the cabins around there was invited, and that's where the Blackfoot Indians, that's their territory. I have a friend there at Browning, Montana. That's the main town of that place. She's a social worker with those Indians, and if she had a downstairs bathroom, I'd go out there to see her, except that there is no doctor and there's no dentist for anybody except the Indians, and I would be afraid to run that risk too, but that is marvelous country. Now, the dance with the Indians was a joke. We made a circle, and we just kind of patted our feet and went around in the circle. And the chief said that we were just doing that so we could go home and tell people that we danced with the Indians. we went through Rainier National Park. It was early in the season and there was a good of snow still there. That part of the country just is beyond my power to describe. I wouldn't even pretend to start. Then we went to Yosemite Park. It's the first time I'd ever been there. And there we stayed in a tent, but it had a floor, and that's another place that's well worth for anybody going to see. Then I got back down to California. I didn't find Uncle Carl. I just missed connections with him some way. I wrote to him that I was coming, but he had moved or was out of town or something. I never did find him. Mama had some friends, the McDonald's at Long Beach. I can barely remember Mr. and Ms. McDonald because they were so small when they left Quanah, but they were quite good friends, and I went over there and stayed with them several days. They were old folks and they didn't go anywhere to do anything, and they told me if I'd stay till Sunday, they'd get the car out and take me around. Well, I didn't want to stay till Sunday, but it didn't bother me that I didn't have anything to do because I was tired. The rest didn't hurt me. I got on the train and came home. In 1939, I moved to the Lucerne Apartments. I had lived in Fort Worth, you see, since 1921 at boarding houses. Sometimes I'd eat where I had my room, and sometimes I would have a room and go out for my meals. And then I shared this apartment with Bertha Jackson, but I was glad to get in a place of my own. I had an unfurnished apartment, and for $85 I furnished it, and it looked right pretty too. You know, things didn't cost too much in those days. I had a blue studio couch, 2 chairs, one was gold and one was blue, a desk, and my rugs were, I think you call them astrakhan. They're those white wool rugs that have a fringe, and they're embroidered. They're made in Tibet or Iran or some of those places. My bed was a Murphy bed. That's the kind that you put in the closet. And I had a chest in there. Then in the kitchen, I didn't have to buy anything. There was a little built-in table and 2 benches. But I stayed in that apartment 8 years, and I added a desk and whatnot, and some more chairs, and it looked right well when I got through with it. Now, Cecilie spent the night there, but I have an idea she is too little to remember anything about it. When I had company, I'd give my apartment to my company, and I'd go stay all night in somebody else's apartment with them. She visited me more than once there, but I believe that was the only time she came when I was in that apartment. She may remember some more, or some other times. I went back to Mexico in 1940. That made my 5th trip. The first time I didn't see anything much except just a gambling house at Tijuana. Then the next time, when I went to the teachers' convention, I went to Juarez, and that's worth going to. Juarez is a pretty good sized city, and it's interesting. Has real good eating places, but of course that wasn't my main place in my trip. It was just a little excursion, side excursion, and I didn't see much then. But when I went on my long trip to Mexico City with Bertha, it was a wonderful trip, and I wasn't satisfied, though I wanted to go back. So Louis McGee drove my car down there for me, and there were two Berthas in the crowd, Bertha Jackson and Bertha St. John. Now Cecilie knows her. And then the other passenger was Dorothy Tinsley. She was a young teacher, and she was as pretty as a picture I saw the other day. She's now in her 50s or maybe 60, and she's still just beautiful. She married, and her name is Smith. And that was a really a good trip, because, you see, we got to drive all the way. Louis was a good driver, and he took good care of us all the way through in every way. When we got to town, or before we got to town, some men stopped us. They were, I don't know what they call their organization, but it was something like a Quanah club or a Lions club, something like that, maybe Chamber of Commerce. Anyway, it was their job to meet and greet incoming guests and help them find a place to stay, because it was hard to get a place to stay. And this time we hadn't even picked out a place and hadn't made any effort or decision about what we'd do. So one of them got in the car with us and said he'd stay with us until we found us a place. Well, he took us to a home, and I think maybe it was some of his family. Anyway, it didn't suit us. It didn't look like what we were used to. It tickles me every time I think about it. In every bed, they showed us all the bedrooms, and they all had chambers under the bed. We went around to 2 or 3 houses of that sort, and then when he saw we weren't going to be interested in that, he took us to a hotel. It was called the 3 Stars. It's just what you'd call a pension in France and England. It was a nice place. Our room was well furnished, and we had a nice bed. Now, Mexico is like Europe. When you're in a room, that means your breakfast goes with it. One morning when I went downstairs, there was a man in the lobby that had just come back from 14. And he had a log that was planted with orchids, and he had some tequila. He was passing that out. And he gave